Hollywood's golden glow isn't just camera magic, it's carefully crafted illusion. Behind the timeless smiles and sculpted cheekbones lie secrets no studio ever wanted fans to know. These 18 legendary actors didn't just rely on talent. They turned to the scalpel, the syringe, and the surgeon's hand to hold time still. But in hiding their age, did they lose something even deeper? 1. Cary Grant. He was the embodiment of elegance, debonair, refined, and seemingly untouched by time. Cary Grant glided across screens for decades, with a youthfulness that never quite faded. But behind that sophisticated charm was a man waging a quiet war with aging. By the 1950s, whispers in Hollywood circles suggested he had undergone subtle cosmetic procedures. Not a drastic overhaul. Grant was far too classy for that. But a strategic tightening here, a soft lift there. Sources close to him hinted at early forms of a facelift, possibly combined with skin treatments like dermabrasion. His smooth complexion and taut jawline, even into his 60s, sparked speculation that aging had been medically delayed. But Grant never publicly addressed the rumors. He maintained a persona that rejected vanity while quietly embracing it in private. In a town obsessed with youth, Cary Grant mastered the art of aging without appearing old. He didn't look frozen in time. He looked preserved, like a vintage wine that had miraculously avoided the souring of years. His elegance was eternal, but it may have come at a price, concealing the natural rhythm of time to maintain a myth. Grant's true genius wasn't just in his performances, it was in how well he hid the truth. 2. Burt Lancaster. Burt Lancaster wasn't the kind of man who faded quietly. His screen presence thundered, chiseled, athletic, commanding. A former circus acrobat turned actor, his body was as much a part of his persona as his voice. But as age crept in during the 1960s and 70s, so did the subtle signs of time. Crow's feet, sagging skin, the natural erosion of vitality. But Lancaster refused to surrender. It's believed he underwent an eyelid lift, blepharoplasty, to open up his gaze and restore that fierce intensity. Observers also noted changes in his facial contours, especially around the jaw and neck. The square-jawed hero who had once wrestled fate in Elmer Gantry and From Here to Eternity began to look strangely ageless, still handsome, but in a way that defied biology. The studios never commented, and Lancaster, fiercely private, never confirmed anything. But the transformation was visible to anyone who compared photographs. His skin tightened, his lines softened, and he kept landing roles that required that old magnetism. In a business where leading men were replaced the minute they looked tired, Lancaster defied replacement. His use of plastic surgery didn't just mask age, it extended legacy. Yet some say it also dulled the weathered soul of his face. The very lines that had once hinted at depth were quietly erased. Lancaster didn't just fight aging, he outran it for a while, but the chase came at a cost. The vulnerability that comes with time was edited out. 3. Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis was all about flash. With that Bronx accent and movie star grin, he was impossible to ignore. But behind the scenes, Curtis wrestled with a brutal insecurity. He was terrified of being forgotten. As the teen heartthrob days of Some Like It Hot faded, so did the elasticity of his skin and the charm of youth. Curtis wasn't subtle about it. In fact, he later admitted to having a facelift to help recapture that classic allure. But even before his public confession, the changes were visible. His cheeks seemed oddly taut in the late 1970s. His brow, once expressive, became smooth and unmoved. Even his smile, once carefree, took on an eerie stillness. The actor, who once rivaled Elvis in teenage adoration, found himself slipping into television roles and nostalgia-driven cameos. His cosmetic procedures were his attempt to stop the slide. Critics were unkind. They called him vain, desperate, washed up. But in truth, Tony Curtis was just trying to hold on to the spotlight a little longer. Hollywood is cruel to aging beauty, especially male beauty built on charisma and confidence. In the end, the surgery didn't revive his career, but it gave him the illusion of control in a business built on disposability. And maybe that's all Curtis really wanted, to feel seen, even as time tried to erase him. Dean Martin. Dean Martin made looking cool effortless. The cigarette in one hand, the drink in the other, the lazy drawl of a man who'd seen it all and cared little. But Martin was a performer, and his carefully curated image required maintenance. As he aged through the 1960s and into the Vegas years, the playboy persona was harder to keep intact. That's when the whispers started. Eyelid surgery, facial tightening, a bit of nip and tuck to soften the years. It wasn't extreme, but it was evident to those who had seen him. Him in his early crooner days. His eyes appeared more open, the bags gone. His jowls, always on the verge of drooping, held firm a bit longer than nature usually allowed. Dean Martin never confirmed it. That would break character. Cool guys didn't talk about facelifts, but those who worked closely with him noticed the difference, on screen and in person. The Rat Pack was a club of men clinging to youth, and Dean played the part perfectly. But the plastic surgery wasn't just for vanity. It was armor, a shield against a world that doesn't forgive aging stars. Underneath the tailored tux and tuxedo grin was a man who saw time coming and quietly tried to push it back. 5. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was more than a movie star. He was an American ideal. Tall, strong-jawed, with a gaze that melted millions. But Hudson harbored more than just secrets about his personal life. He fought a silent battle against aging, desperate to maintain the illusion of timeless masculinity. As the years passed, Hudson's appearance changed less than expected. Industry insiders noted how his face remained remarkably tight, even in his 50s. Subtle work, jawline refinement, dermabrasion, perhaps a neck lift, kept him looking camera-ready. And it wasn't just for the fans. Hudson knew that age meant fewer roles, especially for a man whose entire career had been built on being desirable. Later in life, as his health declined, the contrast between his youthful face and weakening body became more pronounced. The surgery preserved the image, but not the man. Hudson's real tragedy wasn't vanity. It was the pressure to stay perfect in a world that punished honesty. His surgeries weren't an attempt to deceive. They were a plea to stay visible. 6. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra didn't just command the stage, he conquered it. Old Blue Eyes was a symbol of cool, control, and charisma. But his signature swagger didn't come without effort. Early in his career, Sinatra had a nose job, a fact long whispered among insiders and later confirmed by biographers. The procedure helped him shed the skinny crooner image and ushered him into the realm of Hollywood's elite. But that was only the beginning. As he aged, Sinatra's face appeared unusually smooth, especially in the 1970s and early 80s. There were rumors of facelifts, eyelid surgeries, and even collagen injections, all carefully timed between tours and films. Sinatra didn't want to look young. He wanted to look timeless. His appeal was rooted in effortlessness, so the work had to be invisible. And for the most part, it was. But even as the tabloids speculated, Sinatra kept the mystique alive. He joked about age, but never confirmed any procedures. That silence was strategic. He wanted his fans to believe he was simply born different, untouchable. In truth, Sinatra feared becoming obsolete. In an industry obsessed with youth, the man who once had the world on a string quietly used plastic surgery to tighten that string a little longer. He didn't want to look younger. He wanted to look eternal. 7th, Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando was the rebel, the storm, the face that changed acting forever. But even Brando, larger than life, both in presence and weight, couldn't ignore the reflection staring back at him as time wore on. In the 1970s, Brando's face began to subtly shift. Observers noticed changes in his jawline and cheeks, prompting rumors of cosmetic touch-ups. It wasn't drastic. Brando would never submit to obvious reinvention, but it was enough to maintain the illusion of power, especially during his later roles in The Missouri Breaks and Apocalypse Now. Brando's personal life was chaotic. He ate erratically, gained weight, and sank into reclusion. But even as he drifted from the spotlight, the man who once defined youthful virility seemed to resist the outward signs of decay. Insiders suggested he experimented with early forms of dermal fillers or minor lifting procedures, seeking to preserve the myth of his own intensity. But Brando was also at war with the very idea of vanity. His later years were filled with contradictions. He railed against fame, yet fought aging with cosmetic intervention. He spoke of authenticity, yet reshaped the truth of his face. His plastic surgery wasn't about beauty, it was about control. In a world that demanded he be a god, Brando used the surgeon's scalpel like a mask, trying to hold on to a self he was never ready to surrender. 8. Clark Gable. Clark Gable was the king of Hollywood, but even kings age. With his signature mustache and devil-may-care gaze, Gable charmed audiences through the 30s and 40s. But by the time he entered the 1950s, the competition grew younger, and the camera less forgiving. Though not known for extreme procedures, Gable was rumored to have undergone minor facial enhancements, most notably dental reconstruction and jawline refinement. His trademark smirk stayed intact well into his 50s, and observers noted how his skin, especially around the neck and eyes, remained suspiciously smooth. Hollywood insiders suggested he may have received some form of early facial tightening, perhaps a rudimentary lift or muscle toning technique. At the time, such procedures were rarely acknowledged, but Gable's transformation was hard to ignore. His motivations were rooted in survival. Gable was the leading man of a generation, and his pride didn't allow for a slow fade. He needed to stay competitive, needed to look like the man who could still steal hearts and challenge rivals. In The Misfits, his final film, Gable's face still bore the authority of youth, even as his body began to betray him. He died shortly after filming, leaving behind a legacy wrapped in legend. Clark Gable didn't just wear a crown, he used surgery to keep it on his head as long as he could. 9. George Hamilton. George Hamilton turned tanning into an identity. Always bronzed, always charming, he became a walking embodiment of Hollywood excess, never quite aging, never quite human. But behind the perfect tan was a man deeply invested in preservation. Hamilton openly embraced cosmetic surgery later in life, making him one of the few classic actors to laugh about it, rather than hide it. He admitted to facelifts, Botox, and skin-tightening procedures, maintaining a face that defied time even into his 70s. But the work started earlier than most knew. In the late 1970s, fans noticed Hamilton's face didn't evolve. It simply stayed the same. His cheeks remained taut, his forehead smooth, and his jawline crisp. It was subtle enough not to alarm, but consistent enough to raise eyebrows. For Hamilton, appearance wasn't just vanity, it was strategy. He branded himself as ageless elegance, and the surgery was part of the illusion. In his own words, he didn't want to look young. He wanted to look good. And he did. George Hamilton didn't hide behind surgery. He used it like a tuxedo, worn with flair and confidence. In a town full of quiet nips and secret tucks, he stood out for turning the pursuit of eternal youth into a punchline he proudly delivered himself. 10. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift's beauty was once considered otherworldly, delicate yet masculine, haunted yet magnetic. But after a horrific 1956 car accident, that beauty was shattered. His face was crushed, and what followed was not vanity, but necessity. Clift underwent multiple reconstructive surgeries just to return to the screen. Surgeons rebuilt his cheekbones, repaired nerve damage, and tried to recreate symmetry where there was none. While the medical work was essential, it also blurred the line between healing and hiding. In the years that followed, Clift became obsessed with mirrors, makeup, and his appearance. Though the public viewed his changes as tragic, insiders say Clift began seeking additional procedures, not just to correct damage, but to mask aging accelerated by trauma and alcohol. The once perfect profile became stiff. His expressions faded. The haunted look deepened, but now from scars, not mystery. Clift didn't chase youth for glamour. He chased it to reclaim a self he lost on a winding road one rainy night. His surgeries weren't indulgent. They were desperate attempts to stitch together the man he used to be. In the end, it wasn't time that aged him. It was pain. And the surgery was never enough to erase it. 11. Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas didn't just play gladiators, he embodied them. Rugged, intense, with a chin that could carve marble. But as time marched on, even Spartacus couldn't battle aging without reinforcements. Douglas was always acutely aware of image. A survivor of the old studio system, he built his brand on strength and masculinity. So when wrinkles crept in and gravity began its slow assault, Douglas fought back, with the tools Hollywood silently endorsed: discreet facelifts, skin treatments, and possible neck lifts. Photos from the 1980s revealed a curious truth. While his contemporaries aged naturally, Douglas's features stayed unnaturally defined. His jaw remained taut, his forehead suspiciously smooth, and his eyes free of the puffiness that marked other men his age. It was clear some intervention had taken place, but Douglas never admitted to plastic surgery. That would dent the myth. He preferred to credit good genes and a warrior's mindset. Yet biographers and Hollywood insiders tell a different story, one of subtle tweaks performed with precision to maintain his cinematic dominance. He wanted to keep acting, keep producing, keep leading, even into his 70s. And that required the face of a legend, not a retiree. Kirk Douglas didn't fear aging. He just didn't want it to show. His surgeries weren't about ego. They were about legacy. In a world that immortalizes its heroes, he refused to look anything less than eternal. 12th. Robert Wagner. Robert Wagner had the kind of charm that aged well, at least visually. With piercing blue eyes and a voice as smooth as silk, he was the kind of man audiences wanted to believe would never get old. And for a long time, it looked like he didn't. Wagner's face in the 1990s and early 2000s appeared eerily untouched by time. His skin was firm, his eyes youthful, his jawline intact. While most of his contemporaries surrendered to gravity, Wagner floated above it, leading to whispers of cosmetic intervention. Surgeons familiar with Hollywood aesthetics believe he likely had subtle facelifts and skin-tightening procedures, perhaps even a brow lift or eyelid surgery. The key was subtlety. Wagner never looked frozen, just improbably well-rested. It was the kind of work that didn't scream plastic surgery, but whispered ageless grace. His career longevity depended on that illusion. Even in later years, Wagner was cast in romantic roles, mentor figures, and suave patriarchs, and his face, smooth, unlined, helped sell the fantasy. He never spoke openly about cosmetic enhancements, preferring to keep the mystery alive. After all, mystique was part of his brand. In the end, Wagner's surgery wasn't about vanity. It was about continuity. He played the role of the charming gentleman so long, he simply became it. And in a world built on image, he made sure his never faded. 13. Mickey Rourke. Mickey Rourke's face is perhaps one of Hollywood's most tragic transformations. Once hailed as the next Brando, Rourke possessed a raw, brooding magnetism in the 1980s that made him a critical and fan favorite. But fame didn't protect him from inner demons or physical destruction. In the 1990s, Rourke walked away from acting and into the boxing ring. The decision would forever alter his face and his career. A series of brutal matches left him battered. His nose was broken multiple times, his cheekbones crushed. The damage was severe. Desperate to repair it, Rourke turned to plastic surgeons. But instead of restoration, he found disaster. Poor surgical work, botched corrections, and multiple revisions left his once handsome face nearly unrecognizable. He later admitted that most of the surgeries were to put his face back together. But they became an obsession. What began as reconstruction slowly morphed into reinvention. Lip fillers, eye work, jaw reconstruction, all layered on top of a broken canvas. Rourke's transformation became a cautionary tale. The industry that once adored him now gawked at him. Roles dried up. His face became the subject of late-night jokes instead of casting calls. But behind that changed visage is a man who suffered, physically, emotionally, and professionally. His plastic surgery wasn't about hiding age, it was about reclaiming identity. And in the process, he lost both. Mickey Rourke's face tells a story no makeup can cover. A tale of pain, pride, and the price of trying to fix what life has shattered. 14. Peter Lawford. Peter Lawford was the polished English gentleman of the Rat Pack, graceful, debonair, and always camera-ready. But unlike Sinatra or Martin, Lawford lacked the raw magnetism to stay forever relevant. He needed polish, both in persona and appearance. As his career slowed in the 1960s, Lawford sought to preserve his look through cosmetic means. Rumors swirled about early facelifts, especially targeting his sagging jowls and drooping eyelids. While subtle, the differences between his pre- and post-1965 appearances were stark. His face became tighter, smoother, almost too perfect for a man entering his 50s. He never discussed the surgeries publicly, but those close to him claimed he was increasingly obsessed with maintaining youth. Studio contracts had dried up. The phone didn't ring as much, and Lawford, once married to a Kennedy, was now more interested in appearances than performances. The procedures weren't disastrous, but they also weren't enough to restart his career. Unlike Sinatra or Dean Martin, Lawford lacked the myth to protect him. He looked good, but not good enough to matter. In time, even the surgeries faded, leaving behind a man still chasing his prime in the mirror. His legacy became more about who he associated with than what he accomplished. Peter Lawford used plastic surgery not to deceive, but to hold on. Not to become someone new, but to delay being forgotten. 15. Warren Beatty. Warren Beatty was Hollywood's golden boy, the charming Lothario, the actor-director-producer who could do it all, but his appeal was always rooted in appearance. Beatty wasn't just a leading man. He was the leading man. And that kind of image requires maintenance. As Beatty aged into the 1990s and early 2000s, eagle-eyed fans noted something peculiar. He wasn't changing. The lines around his mouth stayed faint. His forehead remained oddly smooth. His hair was still full and thick. It was too perfect. Too consistent. Plastic surgeons speculated about micro-facelifts, Botox, and skin resurfacing treatments. Some believed he may have even dabbled in subtle hairline work. The goal wasn't to look young, but to avoid looking old. Beatty never addressed the speculation. In interviews, he leaned on his charm and wit, deflecting age-related questions with humor. But those who knew the industry recognized the signs. His 2016 film, Rules Don't Apply, showed a man still holding on to a bygone aura. Beatty's performances remained dignified, but the face behind them was not untouched by artifice. Warren Beatty didn't use plastic surgery to chase youth. He used it to extend mystique, to stay relevant just long enough for one more spotlight. And in doing so, he reminded Hollywood that the illusion of youth is sometimes more powerful than the truth of age. 16. Paul Newman. Paul Newman had the kind of face that legends are sculpted from: icy blue eyes, a boyish grin, and skin that seemed kissed by stardom. Even as decades passed, Newman somehow remained ageless, defying time with a grace that felt almost supernatural. But Hollywood knows better. Insiders whispered that Newman may have quietly embraced early skin resurfacing treatments, including dermabrasion and chemical peels, to maintain that enviable glow. Others suspected minor eye work, like blepharoplasty, that helped erase fatigue from his famously intense gaze. Newman never confirmed anything. That wasn't his style. He preferred racing cars and building salad dressing empires to discussing aesthetics. But those close to him noted his fascination with grooming and his desire to stay camera-ready well into his 60s and 70s. Photos from the late 80s show a man whose face seemed resistant to gravity. His expressions never appeared frozen, just gently softened, like a vintage photograph retouched to hide wear. While others wore their years openly, Newman wore his with polish. Yet Newman never lost credibility. He didn't use surgery to chase vanity. He used it to stay sharp, to honor the craft, to make sure when the camera rolled, he still looked the part. His beauty never became a mask. It remained a mirror of who he was: controlled, composed, classic. 17. Rod Taylor. Rod Taylor burst onto the screen with rugged charm in The Time Machine and The Birds. But his rise came with a quiet understanding. Looks weren't optional. They were currency. As Taylor entered the 1970s, the shift was subtle but noticeable. His once youthful face began to tighten, especially around the eyes and jawline. Observers noted a more sculpted chin and a smoother forehead, leading many to believe Taylor had undergone a conservative facelift or early skin tightening procedures. Not enough to change him, just enough to preserve him. Unlike some stars, Taylor never denied the rumors, nor did he confirm them. He simply kept working, taking roles in westerns, action films, and thrillers that demanded vitality. He knew that casting directors didn't hire nostalgia. They hired believability. Taylor's cosmetic choices weren't about looking young. They were about staying in the game. And for him, that game was everything. Even as Hollywood turned to newer faces, Taylor lingered on screen longer than expected. His fans noticed, even if they didn't fully understand why. His surgery wasn't overdone. It was strategic. A way of saying, I'm still here, and I've still got it. Rod Taylor may not have been the biggest name of his time, but he was one of the smartest players. And in Hollywood, that's how you win. 18. Anthony Quinn. Anthony Quinn's face was a canvas, weathered, expressive, alive with character. From Zorba, the Greek, to Lawrence of Arabia, his performances thrived on raw emotion and physicality. But even the most expressive face cannot escape time. In the 1980s and 90s, Quinn's appearance drew attention, not for how much it had changed, but for how little. His jaw remained firm. His neck, often the first-place age shows, stayed surprisingly taut. Surgeons speculated that he had undergone a neck lift, possibly combined with facial sculpting to maintain his distinctive profile. Quinn, ever the artist, never discussed cosmetic work. That would diminish the mythos. But behind the scenes, those who worked with him spoke of his commitment to self-maintenance. He didn't want to be immortal. He just didn't want to fade. For Quinn, aging was a paradox. He celebrated it in his art, but resisted it in the mirror. His decision to quietly undergo surgery wasn't about hiding, it was about staying present in an industry quick to forget. Anthony Quinn was never just a face. He was a force. But even forces, in Hollywood, sometimes require reinforcement. In a world built on illusion, these actors sculpted not just characters, but their very identities. Plastic surgery wasn't always about vanity. It was survival, reinvention, defiance. They fought against time with scalpel and spotlight, hoping to stay golden just a little longer. Because in Hollywood, age isn't just a number, it's a risk.